jnana does wash away gross impurities, but it is powerless to wash away the subtle ones. And some may say that we're giving a narrow meaning to the word knowledge, because if we have this knowledge, then nothing can affect us. But he says to hold that knowledge cannot cleanse the mind completely, because it undervalues this devotion which we're trying to develop. He says, my point is that it is hard to attain pure knowledge while living in a mortal body, because we're just subject to too much suffering. Like I say, the Buddha explained this fully. We're just subject to too much of it. The knowledge that we can have while we are encased in this body is bound to be somewhat imperfect and incomplete. Here is the important word. Even if we do have knowledge of God, ultimately it is incomplete unless this devotion aspect is there as well. And we see throughout all religions, it's said God is the God of love. The Dalai Lama and all the great proponents of Buddhism say compassion. It's easy to get knowledge and understanding, but to have that knowledge and understanding coupled with devotion, that is the completeness we're after, and that is this pure consciousness, this dual aspect, this softness of heart. To be like, just, the word in Sanskrit is madhura, just to be sweet. Have a sweet nature in all circumstances. So, but then he'll conclude to say, this saguna aspect, this devotion to God, needs help from the nirguna. So they're both acting simultaneously. One must eventually learn to free oneself from attachment to and preoccupation from individuals and outer forms. So here now he's speaking of the highest attainment. Ultimately, we must free ourselves from this seeming dependence on an external form of God, which really the spiritual great masters and saints are saying, it's a stage we need to employ and ultimately we'll transcend it. Many say it's a stage which also brings development, but it also it conveys this sweetness because you have contact with God. You have contact with that inner, like, you feel loved. You feel the embrace of superhuman consciousness. And it's so sweet, then you're able to employ tapas and these different austerities, or to live a simple life and to simplify the acquisition of wealth and things that give, yes, some alleviation to suffering, but this sweetness you get from God contact, this comes mainly from that devotion. Knowledge will not give that. So here's the key. So besides the fact it's an eventual stage that must be transcended, while we're in that stage, it's so sweet because God is that pure sweetness, and that comes to us and we feel it. And we're then truly able to love and exercise compassion on the manifestation of God. So he ends by saying, this devotion to God is indeed the source of inspiration, but the ultimate culmination must be in this formless nirguna approach to God. In commitment to principles, self-knowledge must ultimately emerge from the womb of devotion. So here it's beautiful, and this is the way they do it in the East. It's just like a little child from birth. The womb of devotion, from that you come out and you grow and you mature into this, and it's a stage. And so, like all things in life, but as we remember even our childhood days, we can remember usually sweeter times than in adulthood, because we were free, we had, you know, of course we had trouble because there was school and parents and all the things that were seemingly oppressed because they were trying to mold us. But that kind of feeling of independence, that comes with this devotion. So he says, the plant of bhakti must blossom into the flower of self-knowledge. And so there we are. And that's the key, that we realize, just like everything in nature, when you're a plant, and so Sri Ramakrishna speaks about this so beautifully, you need to hedge it around a little And so in other words, as you're maturing in spiritual life, you're in a sense hedging around this devotion to God. And so the cows, the cattle, all the things that in the world that can gnaw at you, they won't get at you and eat you alive until you grow and become strong. And at that point, you don't need the hedge, ultimately. But then what many people find, they never want to abandon it because of this sweetness that the contact of God does. And so, as we were speaking last week, how is it done? How do you develop devotion? Mainly, as we spoke, it's prayer and meditation. And then it's not exclusively prayer and meditation, because the masters and the saints will say, you judge the efficacy and the depth of your meditation, not how you're doing through that hour or 2 hours or your length of meditation, but the effect it has on your life outside of meditation. What kind of a person are you? How much are you demonstrating love, compassion, purity, and how much are you diminishing these subconscious qualities that are coming from karmas and just being open and full and really the word spiritual, which means contact with that which is in. Some even say, and I really believe it, that prayer is actually greater than meditation. But what meditation does, it opens the heart and it expands the mind so your prayer becomes supremely sincere. And so the great saints will say, if you have sincerity, you have everything. It's not how much of a renunciate you are, whether you wear clothes like this or a comfortable shirt. It's the sincerity of your approach to ultimately the fact that you are an embodiment of that love and compassion. So meditation, again, Oma, you're going to say prayer is the branch from which the flower of understanding will come, but the meditation is the water that nourishes it and makes it strong, because there are elements that diminish it. The heat of anger, the drought of hard-heartedness, all of these things we need to avoid. So that is kind of the approach that we take. Of course, there's a lot that can be discussed from how, why, but I think we've covered why. So if anyone has any questions about the application of this, or if even someone says, well, frankly, I'm not convinced that we need to have an ideal, an externalized ideal in terms of God with form, I can love myself. I can actually establish that divine contact and understand that. And so therefore I feel it a limitation to kind of have an external belief, because ultimately, if you have a scientific approach, ultimately you can't verify it. You can't say, I know this is God. I know this is a form of God. I haven't seen him. No one else really has, and can say this, or cause him to appear and say, this is God, and I'll show you. Even though there are some that do, we probably, all of us, haven't met one. And so still there's that element of like, you're dealing with an uncertainty. But the spiritual practice, when it's employed properly, with devotion, that uncertainty literally evaporates. Because when it's said in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and the Quran and the Sufi scriptures and in the Torah that God can be seen, what they're saying is, as has been described by Sri Krishna and other great masters, you don't see God with these senses, with the normal 5 senses. You see God with what they call the indriyas, or the senses of the heart.